Hey, it's Fun Chief back again for another installment of the Alliance Match training series where fortune favors the prepared mind. Next up is Lesson 6, Unit Build Plan Principles. And the intent here is to go over some like overarching high level principles that you should keep in mind when you're putting together your build plan. These are things that myself and a few other alliance members kind of kick around a little bit and say occasionally, and I find they're helpful for helping others understand a way to think about how to put together your build plan. So with that, let's get into it. So unit build plan key principles. The first there is adaptability. And that's really about preserving choices to allow your plan to adapt to what the enemy builds. So the idea is if you see the enemy doing something that is either unexpected or gives you the opportunity to make an adjustment for an advantage, then you want the ability to be able to do that. And so making sure that your build plan has some adaptability is really important. Now, flexibility is a little bit different, and that's where you're building units that allow for flexible employment against a variety of units. So, a good example of that would be SAMs versus MAVs. SAMs are surface to air missiles, MAVs are mobile anti air vehicles. SAMs are really good against fixed wing, not so great against rotary wing. MAVs, of course, are great against motor ring. They're pretty good against fixed wing, and they're pretty good also in melee with soft targets like infantry and so on. So, if I were to pick a unit, I had to choose between one and the other. You can't usually build everything. Then I would pick MAVs over SAMs in this particular case because I wanted to preserve flexibility with that unit. Now, surprise is a really important part of the game because after a while, people are going to know your alliance and they'll figure out, they'll use that intelligence preparation of the battlefield that I talked about in one of the other lessons, and they'll use that against you. And so, what you want to do is make sure you mix up your build plan a little bit, and it's also helpful occasionally have unexpected units. So some places that I've seen people do things that are different with ballistic missiles or special forces or elite subs. These are not necessarily game changing, but they definitely throw you off, and there's something that are pain to contend with. So I throw in surprise as something that you want to keep in mind, so that the enemy can't just figure out what these guys do and come up with a counter for it. Now, range is incredibly important because units with range are always going to be much greater than units with melee. Well, I shouldn't say always. There are a couple of circumstances where melee is going to be really helpful or fun, but in most cases, 90% of the time, you're going to find that units with range are going to be really important. And if you're able to damage the enemy and not take damage in return, that's obviously the best circumstance. And that's ultimately what you're trying to strive for. Either you can outrange the enemy or you can move faster than them so you can dart in, shoot, and dart out. And that's ultimately what you're trying to do. And that's why range is so important. Now, Navy is key. Navy doesn't win the game for you, but it does set conditions for you to be able to win, is what I say. And by that I mean once you dominate the enemy and destroy the enemy's fleets at sea, you now have the oceans that you can move things through and move things over. If the enemy tries to move things through or over, you're going to be able to interdict them with your ships. And you're also going to be able to take your ships and go destroy any infrastructure they have in their cities within range. And that's going to be usually how you wind up winning the game. Is you destroy infrastructure, they no longer can replace losses, and then over time you grind them down and win. And then finally, the last thing is shoot first. So really important units are the radar units, the MEGRs, the mobile ground radars, MGRs, and the AWACS. Those are incredibly important. Both of them are, because what you want to do is find the enemy, fix the enemy, and then destroy the enemy. You find them with these radars, you fix them with maneuver, and you shoot them, of course, with your artillery and your naval units. And each of these have pros and cons to them. Radar MEGRs are able to tell you if there's any fixed wing aircraft, or if there's any if they're level 3 and above, they'll be able to tell you that there's infantry and mechanized units within range. Um, and AWACS can see helicopters that Meggers can't see. So together, the two of those things make a really good pair in each other, with each other. So my advice would be to definitely try to make extra AWACS if you can. Usually, one country can only build about two of them. Extra radars, we tend to make a lot of them because that helps us understand where everything's at across the battlefield, and that gives us the ability to go find them and kill them. And ultimately, if you can see the enemy, often you can get the first shot off. And if you can get the first shot off, then you have a chance where you can back away quickly, and they won't even have an opportunity to shoot back at you. And that's ultimately what you want to try to do, is inflict damage on the enemy and get no damage in return. And you can't do that unless you have really good radar and AWACS coverage. So with that, that's the unit build plan, key principles. Keep these things in mind, and you will do a lot better in your games. So with that concludes lesson number 6, the Alliance Match Training Series, where fortune favors the prepared mind. Up next, lesson 7, unit analysis, is where I go over some of the details of the more common, more likely units that you're likely to encounter in an alliance match. And with that, Fun Chief, out here. See you next time.